which make it almost impossible for unions to have an effective resistance. And that is why take-up in unions is so low. And this is particularly the case for people in precarious jobs. And yet again, this is where racism plays into it. Because people from migrant backgrounds, people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds are overrepresented in more precarious work. If you look at specific backgrounds, then it's even more stark. So if you look at statistics for people who have successfully claimed refugee status, then unemployment rates are disproportionate. And also, when people are employed, then it is often in jobs that are far below their skill level. So racism plays into other aspects of an unfair, profit-driven system, where on the one hand, you've got the ruling class, you've got the government and their cronies, who are quite free to hand out contracts willy-nilly to their friends in big business. Remember how £12 billion was just given to a private company in order to develop a COVID app that didn't even work. When that app could have been developed by the NHS, GPs in local areas could have been given extra funding to knock door to door. That is how they did it in some countries. In socialist Cuba, a poor island, but who prioritizes people above profit, then within a month, then the whole population had someone knocking on their door, asking about health conditions, finding out if they had any lung problems, and if people did get diagnosed with COVID, then they and all their contacts in Cuba were quarantined and provided with 4 meals a day and a healthcare professional looking after them. Compare that to Britain, one of the richest countries in the world, where people were abandoned and the food banks had to step in. And they had to step in and step up because people were left hungry if they couldn't go to work. And let us not forget that when they talked about a lockdown, we were still active out on the streets during that period because people were still being deported during that period. In a global pandemic, then people were being moved across the country and put into detention centres in overcrowded dorms where COVID was allowed to let rip through the population. And what happened in prisons, which are also where black people are also overrepresented, not because black people are more likely to commit a crime, but because the criminal justice system is institutionally racist. From the fact that if you are a black man, you are 6 or 7 times more likely to be stopped in the street by the police in the first place. And then if the statistics carry on, if you go to, you're more likely to be charged, you're more likely to be arrested, you're more likely to be given a harsher sentence for the same crime in comparison to a white person. And if you are unlucky enough to not have been born in this country, then no matter what crime you did or didn't commit, you are then at risk of deportation. So over the last year, we've seen the campaign for Osame, who was threatened with deportation to Jamaica. And his case was particularly harsh because he was imprisoned under a law called joint enterprise. Now, joint enterprise is a law which says that you can be put in prison for a crime that somebody else committed by association. Now, it's interesting that I don't know, prove me wrong if you like, but I cannot think of a single instance where joint enterprise has been used against white-collar workers involved in corruption. It's not been used against our MPs. It's certainly not being used against Boris Johnson. Joint enterprise is a law which is racist in its application. The assumption is that if you live in a certain area and you're black and someone else who was also black committed a crime, then you must know them. Because, aren't all black people in a gang? This is racism, and it is having real impacts on people's lives. Now, Osame Brown, for a whole year, had to face a threat of deportation to Jamaica. Not only did Osame have high support needs because of his autism, he also had learning difficulties. When he was told by his mum that he was going to be deported to Jamaica, his first question question was to ask, what bus can I get to Deptford from Jamaica? You know, this young man has got no support network in Jamaica. He was threatened with deportation because of a racist system. So I started off this talk trying to clarify what is it that we mean by racism. Because we do not mean just individual attacks on the streets. It's about the system.
And do whatever you want.
And let's just go a bit broader, shall we? Let's think about this country, where this man who's trying to disrupt us says that England is the most tolerant country in the world. That's an interesting point of view, because when the NHS was founded, did anyone bother to question about where the money for the NHS
Do not
came
point at
from?
me.
At the same time that the NHS was being founded, and incidentally, it couldn't exist without migrant workers, then the Gold Coast of Africa was being exploited, the rebels in Kenya were being treated as less than human and being tortured, and the people of Malaya were being, their trade unions were being completely banned and shut down.
It's causing people to have arguments because you're telling people that everyone's against them, but they're not. You're telling children that people are against them.
So when I talk about racism, I link racism to imperialism, and that's why my group has a newspaper called Fight Racism, Fight Imperialism. Because we have to ask ourselves, why is this country tolerant? I agree, like I have got certain rights here. I have got the right to freedom of expression that, for example, people in Saudi Arabia do not have. And yet, what I would say is racism is not just about colour of the skin. Now, the Queen of our land does not have any issue supping tea with the princes of Saudi Arabia who are Muslim. She doesn't care. The point is that the princes of Saudi Arabia are rich and the Queen is rich. And that is a beneficial trade relationship. So when our politicians suddenly start crying crocodile tears and telling me that they care about women's rights, we are living in a country, incidentally, where 1 in 3 women are affected by domestic violence. But our government, they care about women's rights. They care about the women of Afghanistan.
Domestic violence in Palestine.
What about the women in Saudi Arabia? What about them?
In Palestine.
Now the difference is, it's about the trade relations between the rich people that run this country and the rich people that run other countries. Imperialism, what we mean by that, it's a system where a handful of rich countries in the world, Britain, the United States, Europe as a bloc, you know, they have got a state, they control the world's resources and wealth. And this impacts on everybody. Because whereas if I want to have a nice meal on a Friday night, I can just nip into Tesco and I can eat whatever food I want from whatever part of the world. I could grow up, my kids could grow up thinking that rice grows white in a packet and never seeing who actually does the labour to get that wealth here. And imperialism is a system where some countries, it's as if they are just got a right to be rich. You know, that's what this guy is going on about. But if you are genuinely anti-racist, we have to question, why are some countries poor when some countries are rich? Because I would say to you that the argument that's often used, that it's about corruption, is absolute rubbish. It's rubbish. I'm not saying that there are not corrupt leaders, say in Nigeria, but I would ask you, where's their money? Where is the money of the corrupt politicians kept from Nigeria? Because I'll tell you, it's in the City of London, it's in the banks of Switzerland. This is a global system of corruption. The City of London, it's been exposed several times, like all the banks in London. They are involved in the highest level fraud in the world. And we benefit, as a country, we benefit from that. But we don't all benefit equally. This country belongs to the people. The rich, the politicians, Boris Johnson and their friends, the Queen and her cronies, they are no more like me and you. They're not. They do not care about you. They do not care about me. They do not care about poor, white, working class people who are homeless on our streets. And they also do not care about the disproportionate homelessness of migrants who are being forced out onto our streets by racist laws. Now what I'm saying is not that you should be against racism out of some sort of pity. It's because it makes sense. Because this country has got so much potential. Just imagine what would happen if the wealth of this country was used to benefit the people. Can you imagine? On holiday, I took my kids to this park, in a posh park down south. I've got a friend who lives in Dorset. Oh, I kid you not, this park was amazing. They had musical instruments, they had all of this climbing equipment made out of rope. It looked so beautiful. And I just thought, what about the kids in St Anne's? They don't get a park like that. What about the kids in Clifton? They don't get a park like that. We live in a divided society, but it's not a divided society on the basis of the colour of our skin. It's a divided society because the rich are absolutely determined to get richer, and they will do whatever it takes. We've seen them. They've sent COVID into our care homes. They've put our grandparents at risk, and they've got away with it. And not only have they got away with it, but they've profited from it. The incidence of millionaires has actually increased in the last year, and yet poor people are getting poorer. And they're telling us that that our neighbour who's getting universal credit, they deserve to have 20 quid knocked off. What? Because they should be in the gutter for being poor, or for being disabled, for being unemployed. Now I tell you that we need unity of a different kind, because the only difference between me and someone who's unemployed is a pay packet. Unemployment can happen to anybody. And if we believe the lies of the rich that say that, you know, black people deserve to be in prison because they're all in gangs, single mothers deserve to be poor because they've had it coming, and yet at the same time the government's doing nothing about domestic violence, it's shutting down women's refuges. I've talked to women in this city who've been placed in emergency accommodation that is not fit to put your dog in, I tell you. Hotel rooms where the mattresses are stained with liquids and bloods. The Stage Hotel, you know, you won't hear a peep out of this Labour Council that supposedly cares about everyone. The Stage Hotel, up near where Goose Fair used to be, remember? It's still boarded up now. What happened in that place? Why, when the police visited that hotel time and time again,
don't listen to the Marxists. England is the number one most tolerant country in the world. Is England. Do not pay attention to the communists. Do not pay attention to the Marxists. They are divisive. They're calling white people racist. How hypocritical is that?
Imperialism.
They are hypocrites.
Because only through unity can the world's majority claim what they are owed. And all I'm talking about, this is the demands. If you go to any country, ask the women in Sudan, ask the women in Palestine, ask the women in Nigeria, in Brazil, what do the women want? We want safety for our children. We want to be able to live in peace. We want to be able to walk the streets. We want to be able to feed our children. And we want to grow old, safe in the knowledge that we do not have to fear about being dumped. We want to be able to go to work knowing that if we have an accident at work, if we end up disabled because of our work, then we will be looked after. Now I am a socialist, I'm a communist. This man here seems to think that's some sort of slur. But Che Guevara said of communism that a true revolutionary is motivated by great feelings of love. And I don't think that's very different to many of the teachings in the world.
Do not listen to the communists.
I'm not a Christian. I'm not saying that we should just love Christians, we should just love Muslims. I'm saying that humanity deserves human rights, basic needs. And our country is stopping others from getting their basic needs met. Our country gets rich by selling weapons to regimes like Saudi Arabia. They are bombing Yemeni women and children. So when our government says they care about the rights of women in Afghanistan, I tell them bullshit. No, you don't. Because the women in Afghanistan have got their own revolutionary organisations, and you have ignored them for years. And you supported the Mujahideen to rise to power in Afghanistan, and the Taliban came about because of that. It's the same with the attacks on Iraq. How is it in the interest of women and children for the bombs that were dropped in Iraq who are still poisoning the soil today? The poison that is caused by capitalism is completely unnecessary. And that is why I support Black Lives Matter. People sometimes tell me, well, all lives matter. Do they though? Do all lives matter? I would say if you're living on universal credit and the government's trying to take £20 off you,
if you get free
does
money
your life
in England,
matter?
if you get free money in England,
If you are
somebody's England's fault.
forced to
get free money
in a room shared with 12 other people at the height.
Where else can you get universal credit?
Then does
Nowhere.
it matter? Of course
England
it does to
is the
you.
number one
But the point
most tolerant
is
country
that
in the world.
lives do
England
not matter
is the most
to the
tolerant
rich.
country in the
When
world.
we say
Do
Black
not
Lives
listen
Matter,
to
we
the
are saying this as a
communists. Do not
demand.
listen
But
to the
yes,
Marxists.
all
They
lives
are
should matter,
divisive.
including Black lives, including Palestinian lives, including Afghani lives, including white lives.
Nottingham, 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 Nottingham.
It means we stand for equality. And I hope you can hear, listening, what we are actually trying to convey. Because we have got...
Do not listen. Do not listen to the communists. Do not listen to the Marxists. Do not listen to them.
To fight racism, fight imperialism.
Do not listen to the Marxists. Don't listen to the communists. England is the number one country.
Where is my out? Where is my fucking out?
Every time they're talking about black and white, divide everybody. How can they talk about racism? Calling all white people. Is that not racist? Unbelievable. The hypocrisy. England is the most tolerant country in the world. England is the most tolerant country in the world. England is the freest country in the world, the fairest country in the world, and the safest country in the world. If we walk around and no one is going to hurt us unless we do something criminal, then we might get arrested. But in England, you can say whatever you want. England is the number one most tolerant country in the world. Do not divide us on race. We are the most tolerant country in the world. Do not listen to the communists. Do not listen to the Marxists. The hypocrites talking about racism and calling all white people racist. How absurd are you? Absurd. My website, not online. If you check out my website, it's not.online. I'll be here every single week to make sure there's a nice balanced opinion in this Nottingham city centre that we're studying.
You'll be here by yourself because we were going somewhere else.
Oh, absolutely.
You will back and forth with your dad.
So accept the red one.